What is shaken? Welcome to this episode of the Wind Up podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to give it a like and subscribe or follow the show wherever you're consuming your podcasts. You can also follow us on any of our social networks. That's on YouTube, Instagram, the Book of Face, and the social network formerly known as Twitter. The handle on all of those will be at MTGA Wines. You can head to our website, mtgawines.com. Scroll down to the bottom of that homepage. You can fill out the little form there and submit questions, ideas, and thoughts for the show to dive into in future episodes. While you're there, you can also find out a little bit more about us, our wines, and all the goings on that we have around the country and, of course, here in the Napa Valley. Now, to kind of continue where we left off with this impact of, this sea of sameness that we were talking about in the last episode, following the new money between proprietors and the owner-operators that are doing the thing or have been doing the thing for some time, the impact that it's had on us smaller, family growers. There is this kind of sales component that we have to address. And this is something that has come up more and more kind of in the social feeds more recently, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is just, I think there are a couple people that just have a gross misunderstanding of what, like, the numbers they're talking about. So welcome back to the show, everybody. We're continuing this conversation on, just the plethora of commentary that's come out over the last couple of weeks. All of the links from all of the articles that we're referencing over these couple of episodes will be in each of the descriptions, so that way you can just easily access them. But for this episode, we're diving into kind of the social media kind of like pundit, category of things, which I don't have a lot of links for these, but I'll kind of reference some of the folks and kind of what they've been saying. It's because it's a common thread. There are a few common threads here. And, a big part of it is, not just kind of the price and the expense of coming out here and where the wines have gone, where some of these newer owners, but even, owners that have been here for a long time, where the price of those wines have gone. It's also just the accessibility, how easy it is to get in and around Napa and experience some of these wines, with friends, family, whomever you're bringing out here, right? There have been two folks. I wish I could remember the podcast they were on. I know of them. One is, I think, one of the operators or maybe owners of Napa Bike Tours. Another one participates in Bang Napa Valley, which is the by appointment network group, which is all these small wineries that come together to kind of talk shop and network and things. And, I think that I don't disagree with, some of the things they have to say, but a lot of it, I think, just doesn't come from, the right place. Because some of it is like price points of the wines that they're serving. So we can use Napa Cabernet as an example. I mean, it's if you're relatively new to this industry, and we're talking relatively new within like the last 15, 20 years, to be the ability to make a bottle of Napa Cabernet that you can retail to you, the consumer, for $60 is basically impossible. It's far too expensive to operate here. The fruit is far too expensive. Whether you're farming it and you're still paying off the land or you're buying it from somebody else, it is damn near impossible to achieve that kind of stuff. From, one thing I do agree with both of these individuals on is, where tasting fees have gone. Because some of them are $1.25, $1.50, $200 a person to taste through some, to have the privilege of tasting through some of these wines. And I do understand the frustration for many of you, who experience that when you come down here, because it used to just be, hey, we have to budget for, the hotel, the rental car, the driving service to take us from winery to winery. But now the cost center of tasting fees is a whole different conversation. And I do think that some of them have been, gotten way out of hand. And the kind of white linen nature that people try and implement in some of their tasting and hospitality programs is a little overblown, a little overdone, and they're spending way too much money on some of this stuff. They could make it a little bit more turnkey. They could make it a little bit more affordable. They choose not to, at least right now. We'll see how that works out long-term, realistically. And this was a point by Napa Valley Bike Tours in particular, I believe, was that there just aren't that many places just walk in and do a tasting anymore. And that's a big problem. And then you certainly can't walk in and even then you still might be paying like 40, 50, 60 plus dollars for that tasting if you are able to walk in. So not only have most places kind of moved by appointment, we've lost this kind of casual nature of wine tasting in Napa. Now, for someone like us and other small producers that are like tucked away into the hillsides, when you have a couple people on your team, someone has to be there. Like most days, I don't have any cellar or winery work to do. I'm here in my office getting shit done because the internet's way better here. I can do things faster. I can get into town to meet with people quickly. It's a far better place to just get shit done, period. It's super inefficient out there. Now, if I'm working on making wine, obviously that's where I need to be, right? Now, so we're kind of an exception. We're never going to be open to the public because we just can't be. We don't have a team. We don't have someone that's going to sit there and wait for people to call or show up at the property because we're not on the main drag. If you're on Highway 29 or the Silverado Trail, being open to the public can make way more sense. You don't necessarily need to have that appointment. However, there's a huge caveat to that. Now, obviously, there are plenty of places that can be just, hey, walk-ins welcome kind of thing. But you have to remember that this goes back to like Napa County laws from the early 90s with the WDO, the Winery Definition Ordinance. Technically, any winery that was established after that point is required to be by appointment, by law. So think of how many places have opened up over the last 30 years, 35 years, right? That's a bunch. There's a fucking bunch. And they all have to be by appointment technically, right? Legally, they have to be. So even if you wanted more places to be, not by appointment, man, the wrong official shows up on the wrong day and you got a bunch of people there that, whatever, didn't have an appointment, or you're way past your use permit because yes, it is regulated how many people we can see in a day. Like there are certain wineries that can only see, it depends on your permit, but you're told, hey, you can only see X amount of people per year or per week or per day, or whatever the case may be. It is highly, highly regulated because Napa County, for the longest time, has been anti-tourism and, frankly, anti-winery on top of that. They've wanted no business in this growing into what they claim is going to be an adult Disneyland of traffic and tourism and all this stuff. Yet we, the wine industry employs like 70+% of the people in the valley. It's the revenue driver for everything that happens here, whether it's the hotels, restaurants, or otherwise, shopping, I don't care. It's everything, right? Or at least 2/3 of everything that goes on in this valley. So, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be this regulatory. And there's some big pushes that are happening now to change a lot of that stuff, or at least make it easier for smaller businesses and even some of the larger ones to operate and not have to worry about huge fines or getting shut down or any of these things. So, I do feel for some of these folks that want more easy access to more places, but there's a lot of stuff that just institutionally is in the way of making that happen. Now, I mentioned this at the top of the last episode that there was a lawsuit in Michigan that happened fairly recently. And it was, a huge settlement for these wineries that are in the Peninsula Township of Michigan. And they basically, I'm paraphrasing, you might have to look it up on your own, please do. There's, again, a link in the description here. But these wineries sued the county because they felt as though and that's, I don't know if being discriminated against or the regulatory burden was too high or whatever, but they're obviously dissatisfied with how the regulations were coming down. The settlement is for $50 million. Hold on, I got to shout it from back here. $50 million. $50 million for a township in Michigan. That's what these wineries won. Do you think that if a band of wineries here in Napa got a lawsuit like this together because the county's been acting out of line, that we'd probably win based on precedent now? Interesting. It's been very interesting that there have been a couple county officials that I've talked to over recent months who are looking to be, a lot more amenable to what wineries want to do. And maybe we should try and work together more. It's funny how that works when you see a township that can't afford a $50 million settlement, I'm assuming, and, in Michigan, not to say no hate to Michigan, but we drive a lot of revenue out here. I still don't think Napa County could afford a $50 million settlement. So there's that. So times are going to be changing. Obviously it's like turning a cruise ship. It's going to take for fucking ever, but them is the ropes. Now, even if regulatory burdens were lifted, it was easier for wineries to do business out here, you still have to deal with one thing: the cost of just being in business out here. Now, you could, open the doors and say, hey, more people are welcome. But with the teams that have been hired, the facilities that have been built, the money that is spent on maintaining these properties and making these wines, it is still incredibly expensive. I'm going to pull back the curtain for you guys a little bit. And all of you who have tasted out at the winery, this will hit home for you. And if you haven't tasted with us, then hopefully this makes sense. But this number is pretty dead on accurate, because we keep track of, how much, time we spend hosting tastings, how many samples we open up, the paper that we buy to print out for menus, the glassware that we need to buy, the rent that we pay, the licensing, all of that stuff we keep track of. And you would be surprised to know maybe that if you sit down with us for a tasting in the cellar, our cost in doing that is about $60 a person. Let that sink in for a second. If a group of 4 people come out to do a tasting, we are out $240 as soon as their butts hit seats. So if they buy anything less than that, we're out money, because you also have to back out, the cost of making the wines that we're selling as well. There are costs of goods anyway that are involved with that, right? Which is why we charge $75 for a tasting. It's, hey, we're not making a lot, but at least it covers our costs and we get a little something on top to kind of keep going. Because if we break glassware and we need to buy more, if we need to print more order forms, all this stuff, it's purely just to keep a little bit of revenue coming in. That way we can cover some of these costs. Realistically, we don't charge for that many tastings because most people that come to us, small wineries, are buying wine or joining the wine club and things like that. So it's not really an issue. But now extrapolate that out across, many wineries and the hospitality teams that they have and the cost of those wines or the glassware or the experience they're providing. It's not cheap to host people out here. So I understand where, whether it's the Bang group or even the bike tour group, that they're not happy with how expensive tastings are gotten, and it's kind of insane that they've ratcheted up so fast for so many people. But for a lot of us, it's the cost of doing business. And we're not trying to alienate you guys, the consumers. We want you to come out here. We want you to taste with us. We want you to buy wine. We don't want you to just pay for tasting fees. And this is kind of a big part of it versus the, by appointment experiences versus the open to the public. This is like actual data from Silicon Valley Bank and other sources. So you can go look this up if you want to. I'd have to find the correct report, but this is something that's been ongoing for like 10, 15 years. A lot of data has been plugged into this. If you walk into a tasting bar that's open to the public, there's a bunch of other people in there, you belly up to a bar and you do a tasting, that consumer is going to spend less money than someone who has a seated tasting experience at the same open to the public place on average. That's the honest to goodness truth. If that seated tasting experience becomes a private tasting experience with a dedicated host in their own space, they spend even more money on top of that. The conversion rate and the average order value as you work your way through that gets way better. So it's really hard for wineries, even if they're the big guys on the main drag, to not lean towards these more private, higher end experiences, because the average ticket value is just so much better than if you just have people coming in and bellying up to the bar. Those are the numbers. You can't argue with them. It's how it is. Now, I understand that there is a demand for that potentially, or there might be one out there where people want a more casual tasting experience, but you're going to have to find a winery with incredibly low operating costs to have that make any kind of sense in this day and age. And that typically is going to become in the form of maybe some conglomerate, that's that has the ability to do that kind of thing, or a family business that's been doing it for many, many generations where, land's paid off. There's not a big, not a lot of debt hanging around and so on. I mean, that's a tough one to tackle because there are so few of us that can actually make that happen. It's a very finite amount. And there are plenty of you out there that would be like, yes, we want to go see the small family places. We're not going to walk into Mondavi. Sorry, we're not going to do it. As good or bad or ugly as you might think the wines are from that particular brand or constellation these days, that might not be your cup of tea because it's seen now as kind of like larger, big production stuff. It's not the small family boutique thing, which I know a lot of you all appreciate, sitting down with the owners and operators of some of these businesses, kind of like as we talked about in the prior episode of being like involved and available to you guys. Like that's a big sticking point, right? So it's like it's really tough for us to tackle this issue. I think, my own 2 cents is, and this is not an easy solution, but if we saw higher volume coming to Napa, more people doing more tastings, and we could spread out those costs a little bit, right? Because the reason that, we would charge $75 for a tasting is that's like, okay, this kind of takes care of the costs of these tastings that we're hosting throughout the year, right? And allows us to reinvest some money back into the business when we need, more supplies than what we've already utilized. That's why it works. Now, if I could see a higher volume of people going back to county rules and regulations and being permitted and limited by them in many cases, if we could increase those numbers and spread that cost out amongst more people, then yeah, maybe we could, reduce some of those prices for you. But we can't, because if we get caught hosting too many people, we could get shut down. So there's that. It's just an absolute, there's no easy answer to this when it comes to, volume and, open to the public tastings and things like there's just not an easy answer for it. It is just kind of a hodgepodge of like one, it's a hydra. Like the second you cut off one head, there's 2 more that pop up and you're like, well, shit, how do we go about this now? Right now, there is kind of this, so we're looking at like this volume pricing conversation, right? And I think it's a decent way to look at it. But there's also, as I wanted to reference the, bottle pricing specifically one more time, kind of while we're on the topic of just pricing in Napa, with tastings and of course the bottles that are associated at those tastings. And going back to the article by Ted Hall, the Napa's Luxury Squeeze, very early on, he talks about the arithmetic driving people towards $100, $150, $200 a bottle. Now, this is something that many of you might not agree with, and I apologize, but this is what we see in the industry. This is kind of how it is. And we had this discussion with this travel group of ours that we went up and down the East Coast a couple weeks back, and we talk about pricing and how we want to present our wines and where these price points are. We don't want, one person pouring a bunch of wine that's like $200 and above. We don't want one person pouring a bunch of wine that's like $60 or less. Not that there's a lot of those around, but we want to have kind of this nice even flow where everyone's kind of, in the same ballpark and hopefully provides some access for everyone to be successful on this sales trip. It's something that we're really diligent about. It really is. The issue, however, and this is something that we've experienced with Blair Payton, kind of our second label, and Brittany's brainchild with her Rosé, Chenin Blanc, and her Grenache. These are wines that are $35 or less. That's actually $34 or less. Save you a whole dollar there. And the issue with pouring these at events or at the winery is that many times, I promise I'm not trying to be accusatory here, but as I throw things, what we see is that on the winery side, what we see is that many consumers aren't going to say, hey, this wine is 1/3 the price of this other wine, which means I'm going to buy 3 times more. That doesn't happen. What typically happens, they go, oh, I'm going to buy 3 bottles. I'm going to get 3 bottles of this and get it for less than $100 instead of 3 bottles of this, which I would spend $300 on. This happens all the time. Again, it's not your fault. You're looking for a good deal. You're looking for quality and value with what you're shopping for. I totally get it. But for many wineries, it doesn't make sense to present their lower tier wines, let's say, or lower tier sounds bad, but lower price point wines, because you're undercutting yourself. And it's something that we struggle with. I mean, it's certainly something that we struggle with because you guys only have so much storage space, just like we do. It's this fridge that's right behind me here. And you're not necessarily going to buy triple the amount of wine because the price is 1/3 the price, right? That's not necessarily kind of the rationale. Now, if that were the case, this would completely change the economics of what happens in the wine industry, right? And I had this happen early on when I started traveling with other wineries because our wines were very typically the more affordable wines on the list. We rarely had something that was north of $100, and it might have been, our single barrel Merlot back in the day, or maybe our Napa Valley Cab when we finally started making that, but that was just a couple of years ago. Most of our wines were in this, $80 or less range between, our white wines, whether it was the Riesling or the Pinot Gris, the Merlot, and our Pinot Noir. Like those were the 3 things. And then we'd have like the single barrel Merlot, what we would have left of it maybe, as that wine that went north of $100. And what we would see on the road in particular during these events is that we would sell the same volume of wine as everybody else, but our average order value was half, right? Or 1/3, because our wines were half the price of others. So there wasn't this kind of like bulk buying that was happening. And this is something that happens to wineries all the time. This isn't a unique story to us. So, whether it's here at the winery or at some of these events on the road, wineries, believe it or not, are employing some strategery to make sure that they're putting themselves in a very good position to sell and have a really good average order price. I know some of you aren't going to like hearing that, but it is the reality. So it is tough for us sometimes to be like, because we want to share some of these wines, like the Chenin Blanc. I'm bringing that to Missouri for sure, along with some of the Rosé, some of Brittany's Grenache. We're going to be slinging that all over the state of Missouri in the next week. I know full well that the orders are going to be good. The volume, the number of bottles will be great, but the average order value, the amount of money spent on those orders, is going to be lower than probably expected because those wines are of a lower price point. And people aren't necessarily going to buy 2 or 3 times as much because of that lower price point. That's just the reality of, it's just the reality. There's no other way to put it. It is something that I don't think I think us in the wine industry need to do some troubleshooting on that. We need to try, again, kind of going back to what we've preached in many episodes of trying to meet you guys where we are and meet your needs. That's something that we need to work on. And we need to have a better understanding of what you guys are asking for. We have, for example, another Cabernet that's $65 a bottle. It's a very different style than what a Napa Cab typically is, but that's because we're trying to keep it at that like around $60 price point. It's been very popular, and some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, our Diversum Cabernet. But we released it to our wine club initially saying like, hey, this is what people are asking for. We're very excited to be able to present this to folks and offer them this kind of daily drinker that we hope people will buy in volume. When we released it, I think we sold 2 cases of it out of 100. We released it to the rest of our mailing list, which is about 2,000 people. We sold 6 bottles. We've basically pushed that thing into, hey, this is going to be a wine that we're going to get out there through distribution, through restaurants and retail shops, because, we don't have another sales channel for it right now. So we're kind of I think, hopefully Brittany and I and other wineries are still trying to troubleshoot this with you guys to figure out what it is you want, what it is you need, and where some of these price points are very prohibitive, where they can be very accessible, and hopefully, give you guys great options, right? For the really high end stuff that is, yes, going to be more expensive. And then some of the daily stuff that is going to be far more value oriented,
but good bang for your buck in the same result. That is something that we in particular have been trying very, very diligently since we started Blair Payton, since we started making Diversum, and then, of course, all of the MTGA wines, all the single barrel stuff, the Cab Franc, the things that go north of $100 very, very quickly, right? We're trying to find out what the right mix is. The only analogy I can think of is like we're working in a paint store and we keep adding a little of this, little of that, and we keep fucking it up like just a little bit, and we keep having to add a little more, right? It's like you're making like a sauce or something. You're like, yeah, more pepper. Needs more salt. That's too much salt. We need more of this. And you keep kind of going back and forth and back and forth. But I do think that even though it is a challenge, this iterating that more of us are doing is going to do wonders for the industry, for you guys, the consumers, and the offerings that we're able to provide for you guys, hopefully. And I do think that it will help increase the overall diversity of what's available here. This is something that, many folks I think have kind of touched on. And it is this idea that, Napa is just, like Napa Cabernet is just overdone. We touched on this in the last episode as well, that there's just so much of it. It's homogenized so quickly, and there's a feeling around the country that it's just, it's good. We know it's going to be good, but it's not great anymore. It's not what it used to be. It's not exceeding our expectations or being as mind-blowing. And I think now you are seeing a little bit more experimentation kind of in the back of cellars with the different varieties, different winemaking techniques, trying to create more affordable, more value-oriented wines while still maintaining some of these really high-end, amazing wines that you guys know and love so much, the things that have built so many of the amazing wine companies out here. It is going to take kind of getting through this shaky season and these years of just turmoil where people can, maybe spend a little bit more R&D and try new things and see how you guys react and see if you like it or not. Obviously the big elephant in the room is replanting. There's so much that has been torn out here in Napa. More of it has gotten torn out this year. You have a lot of people that are replanting or opting not to replant yet because we just don't need the volume right now. And there is a little bit of this inkling of like, okay, like maybe there's going to be people not planting just Cabernet and Chardonnay. Maybe they're going to throw some more Merlot out there. Maybe they're going to do some Valdez. Maybe they're going to do some Syrah or some more Grenache. Like maybe there are going to be some people that are going to start testing the waters for other varieties that are going to grow really well here to give you guys more variety and more options to drink from Napa. Like Napa Cab's not going anywhere. Let's face it. It's going to be around. It's going to be around for a while. But it might be nice to have some other things in the lineup other than, your Bordeaux varieties and Sauv Blanc and Chardonnay. Like as I sit here and drink a really delicious Sauv Blanc. Diversity, I think, is going to be something that is, if Napa is going to eventually kind of be on the come up again and start to exceed, I think, your expectations. And many of you, please correct me if I'm wrong here. But we need some new things coming out of Napa, some new varieties, some new styles. We need some people shaking it up. Whether it's things like Blair Payton or Diversum or what other labels are doing as well. Shoot, actually, this Sauv Blanc that I'm drinking from the Vice, they made a fucking ridiculously tasty orange wine this year. It was for Premier Napa Valley. I don't think they're doing it in mass, but me, I hate natural wines. I hate orange wines. And I was like, this is actually really good. I was very lucky that they were pouring next to us at one of the events, so I was able to have a couple of sips, and it was outstanding. Like, you have no business making, it was an orange wine out of a Viognier of all things. It's like, what do you do? Like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any kind of sense. But the fact that Malik was willing to and able to is amazing. Like, that's a great thing to just be like, you know what? Fuck it. Like, we're going to do something different. And if people like it, great. If people don't like it, great. We'll figure it out. I truly believe that is a direction that is picking up a head of steam out here. And I think it bodes well. But again, it is going to be like turning a cruise ship. It's going to take a minute, y'all. So, we will get there. You're going to see some amazing things that are going to, go a very long way and hopefully increase your overall enjoyment of wine in this place that we love and hold, so dearly. It'll get there. A lot of the pushback and a lot of the rabble out there it's pretty loud. But trust you me, there are a lot of us that are on the case, and we're trying very, very diligently to meet you where you guys are, to try to be more transparent, try to increase your demand and, be interesting and connect with you guys in ways that maybe we weren't so good at before. We're getting there. A lot of the points that we made in this episode are well heard. We totally understand. We get it. It'll take time to get there. And I think as we keep kind of just open lines of communication back and forth, which is what many of you do, asking questions and supplying content and stuff for the show here, just asking those questions about how things operate, why things are the way they are. When you reply to this on social media or send us an email like, hey, Mike, what's the deal with this, that, or the other thing? When you have, articles like these Substacks from Ted Hall sent our way, that's amazing stuff that we can use to help kind of, we can help, I guess, expand on some of these issues and make them, and at least get them on the table and talk about them, right? So that hopefully together we can find a solution for them in the end.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Wind Up Podcast. I'll be back next time to continue the conversation. Until then, be sure to like and subscribe to the show. Follow us on our social networks. That's YouTube, Instagram, the Book of Face, and the social network formerly known as Twitter. The handle for all those is at MTGA Wines. Submit topics for the show on our website. That's mtgawines.com. Just scroll down to the bottom of that homepage and you'll see the form to fill out and submit questions our way. Until next time, have a great day, week, weekend, month, whatever the case may be, and we'll see you next time here on the Wind Up Podcast. Cheers.